distinguished speaker is Dr. Bill Birnes, and many of you aren't familiar with his background, but for those of you who aren't, he is a publisher and managing partner of UFO magazine, on the New York Times best-selling co-author with the late Philip J. Corso of the book The Day After Roswell, the editor-in-chief of the UFO Encyclopedia, and co-author with Coast to Coast AM host George Norrie of forthcoming Worker in the Light. This is about the remote viewing, time travel, and out-of-body projections. In Los Angeles, Dr. Birnes was the co-producer of Lifetime Television's When Husbands Cheat. A&E's. Don't get me started. Okay, I think I was here for a reason. A&E's forthcoming The Riverman and the forthcoming feature film Life in the Balance, all of which were based on books he wrote or developed as a New York publisher or producer. Dr. Birnes has been a National Endowment for the Humanities Fellow, Eli Lilly Foundation Fellow, and Grants Award Judge for the National Endowment for the Arts. And I know he has a lot of very interesting, intriguing information to pass along to us, so without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Bill Birnes.
Thank you, Cheryl. Great introduction. Appreciate it. The motion picture, by the way, When Husbands Cheat, is based on a book by a private detective called Gigi Moores, who had discovered that her husband was cheating on her. Her husband was a vice cop in Chicago PD. She became a private eye, busted him, became a private eye in her own right, and the folks over at Lifetime thought that was a great book, and that's how it became a movie. So that explains that movie for all of the audience. I'm, as Cheryl said, I'm the publisher of UFO Magazine in Los Angeles, and also as managing partner and the editor of the UFO Magazine Encyclopedia, which Pocket Books published just a few months ago. But I would say that one of the most important things I did, both as an author and as a publisher and a literary agent in New York, was getting Phil Corso's, Lieutenant Colonel Phil Corso's Day After Roswell into print, which, as those of you who were here earlier heard, that this was a very tough book to get into print, that it was not something publishers wanted to do in its earlier incarnations. And it really took some doing. It took a lot of rewriting, a lot of editing, a lot of activity to get this book into print and to find a really great publisher in Pocket Books. What we're going to talk about now, and ideally raise a lot of issues for us to chew over in the workshop, is Colonel Corso and the politics of disclosure. You heard this morning, or a few hours ago, that there's much more to the Phil Corso story than appeared in the book. The Phil Corso story was essentially a memoir. As it appeared in print, it was a memoir of an intelligence officer who was handed one of the most incredible secrets in the history of human beings on the planet. And that secret was that the Army knew that what had crashed in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947 wasn't any nose cone of a missile or a balloon or this. It was an extraterrestrial craft. And from that craft, the Army, before the services separated in 1947, yanked away its own cache of materials, which spent the next decades in the Pentagon in a file. And Phil Corso, either because it was his destiny, luck, happenstance, you fill in the blank, was tasked with this incredible mission. Here's the mission. Corso's boss was a man called Arthur Trudeau, who had been the head of Army G2 intelligence, and now was the head of Army R&D, and had tried to get the United States Senate subcommittee on the armed services, Strom Thurmond, to lend his support to financing all these spectacular types of technology that were lasers and things like that, that were in that cache of materials. And Strom Thurmond said to Arthur Trudeau, "We are not going to finance this for one major reason. It was not invented here." Not invented here became the code word for Roswell debris. NIH, not invented here. And so Trudeau had to find a way to get this material into a mode, a position where it could be funded. What was the material? The material was a laser cutting tool, the material was fiber optics, the material was a super tenacity fiber, the material was the integrated circuit, such as it was in 1947. These were some of the items. The monofilament strands of glass that turned out to be fiber optics. These were some of the items. And as you know, one of them was night vision. And as you know, there was night vision at the end of World War II. The German Panzer divisions had it, the British had it, but it was this huge power pack, and they could not get that reduced in size enough to be portable for a GI to wear. So $60 million later, and one inner eyelid from an alien, the light collecting lens, allowed the folks at Fort Belvoir to develop night vision goggles for the Army, which found their first use in Vietnam in the middle 1960s. So this was it. And it was a tough book to get out, a tough book to do. We did it as a story, we did it as a memoir. We did it because Bill Corso had fought a lifelong battle with the enemies of the United States, the enemy within, basically, communists. And it was his position, later borne out, by the way, by the release of the Venona files years and years and years later, decades later, that central organs of the United States intelligence services had been infiltrated by and corrupted by the KGB. And he was borne out to be correct. The issue is, it was the issue in 1997, and it's the issue today. Because the UFO community jumped on this book for a whole bunch of reasons that we get into in the workshop. But the issue was, given the background of real sightings, of flying triangles, of alien abductions, of Roswell, of Kecksburg, of the Flatwoods Monster, of all the tremendous stories, both plausible and implausible, that came out in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, this book became a focus point for a lot of those stories. It was the only book, I believe, and I may be wrong, this was not, don't hold me to this, but I've been told this, the only book on UFOs ever to make the cover, the page 1 of the New York Times. Only one. It did, and it did it because of Strom Thurmond. Strom Thurmond wrote the foreword. He really did. I know you've heard stories about this. It is true that at first he had written a foreword for another book. Colonel Corso went down to Washington, met with John Glenn, met with Strom Thurmond. And remember, both of these individuals were very hard of hearing, I'll be honest with you, and across an office that was huge. They communicated about the foreword, and Bill Corso said again and again, this is about the aliens. This is about Roswell. I must have said it 3 times, 4 times. And Strom Thurmond would talk, I know. And Strom Thurmond signed a release for the foreword for a book, knowing full well the title of the book was The Day After Roswell. Because Strom Thurmond was in cahoots with Arthur Trudeau to get this material into the hands of defense contractors, IBM, Monsanto, so that they could get this material patented in the United States so we could buy it. That was the deal. Really simple. That was the cover-up. You find somebody, a company, IBM, Bell Labs, Monsanto, who's already working on the technology, the Army Experimental Lab, Singular Energy Lab at Columbia University for the laser. Find somebody working on it. Give them the technology. Look, see, here's how they did it. Reverse engineer it, come up with something approximating it, patent the thing, bingo, there's your cover. It's easy. So, that was the premise of this. Now, in his final lectures, before academic audiences in the year that he died, from 1997 to 1998, outside the earshot of critics and debunkers and people like that, he was able to present a story that basically encompassed far more than Roswell. Roswell was a part of it, but the funny thing about Colonel Corso was that he talked about the implications of the story, what the story really meant, what the real secret was behind it. And I know that Phil Corso, I was here, so that's how I know it, alluded to some of the aspects of that story because he talked about his father's papers, the various files, the stories that could not be released. And I'm here to talk a little bit about that too, and the implications of that larger story for the essence of this conference, the premise of this conference, which is disclosure. The central question will be there be disclosure? How will there be disclosure? Who will facilitate that disclosure? Will it be controlled by us? Are we a part of that disclosure? Does it have anything to do about this? Us, this disclosure. What did Colonel Corso say about disclosure? Well, the first thing he said was very simple. He said, everybody's always known the truth. Nobody ever wanted to believe it. In other words, and Stan Friedman has pointed this out to his credit in his books and his articles and his presentations, Stan Friedman has said, and Phil Corso has said, the Army never set out, let's talk about Roswell, the Army never set out to cover up Roswell, right? What was the first thing that happened after the debris was brought back to the 509? Blanchard, Colonel Blanchard, asked his PIO, Lieutenant Walter Hout, to send the press release to the radio and the local papers, Army recovers flying saucer from the desert. That was no mistake. That was no glitch. That was literally Blanchard telling his PIO, just get the story out. And as all of you know, because you're more sophisticated in this field than I am, as all of you know, the crash in Roswell was one of many sightings and incidents throughout the year 1947, preceded by just a few weeks with a major article in the papers about the item that the craft that Kenneth Arnold had seen over Mount Rainier, in which he said these crescents, these objects, skipped through the air like saucers. Okay? Now, so there was no attempt to cover this up. The newspapers reported it, the radio reported it. Why? What happened? What Phil Corso had said was that among the various discoveries the Army made at Walter Reed Army Hospital was this kind of double brain, the two brains, the multiple brains, you call it. There was, and they were androids. They were basically biological robots. That were the EPs, biological robots. They were programmed for space travel. In other words, biologically engineered for space travel. This is what the Army discovered. The Army discovered that these entities had a certain kind of ability. And that ability was the ability let's call it remote viewing, let's call it psychic projection, let's call it the ability to use their mentalics to interface with a craft, to so direct that craft in a specific direction, through space, and yes, through time. Now, so this is like all 101. A year or so after Colonel Corso died, he died in 1998, after he died, I had the absolute pleasure, and this is what bears on disclosure, the absolute pleasure of meeting with the Philip Corso of the United States Navy. Dead man. Not without leaving a huge residue of files. Same with Colonel Corso's files. And I'll tell you where the two sets of files, I can talk a little bit about them, where the two sets of files intersect, where they overlap. We asked this individual, now let me give you the background of the individual. You all know the story, but here's what you don't know. How many of you in the audience have heard about the book, The Case for UFOs by Morris K. Jessup? Famous book in the 50s, right? Mass market book. Do you remember the story, which goes something like this? Morris K. Jessup wrote about the Philadelphia experiment. Whether it's true as it was, what Arlene Burke said, what Carlos Allende said, what Captain Randall said, what Ray Bradbury said, set that all aside for a second. I can spend the next hour going through the Philadelphia experiment, yay, nay, okay? Not the point. The point is, in the book, he talked about the Philadelphia experiment. This was in the 1950s. The Navy was so obsessed with what he wrote about that they asked two officers from the Office of Naval Intelligence to review the book and write notes about the book. And you know the Navy later released a press release saying there was no time travel experiment, and they're giving the book to two naval officers and named the officers, one of whom was George Hoover, to write this public domain, nothing secret here, to make notes about the book. Those notes found their way into an edition of the book called the Barrow edition of The Case for UFOs. And the book seemed to disappear. George Hoover, and later on George Hoover's widow, handed me that book. For time travel, a kind of a holy grail from the 1950s. And here's what George Hoover said. And this is what will bear on disclosure and how it relates to Philip Corso. What George Hoover said, and what Colonel Corso knew, was this. Bill, it never was about the UFOs. Can you imagine somebody saying that to you? It was never about the UFOs. Ever. We knew there were UFOs. What did Phil Corso say? Everybody's seen UFOs. It was in the newspapers. There's no cover-up. How can you have a cover-up when you've got Kenneth Arnold in the newspaper saying he's seen UFOs? What is he, a kook? No. He was a pilot. How can there be a cover-up when you've got UFOs over Washington, D.C.? How can there be a cover-up when the Air Force has to send a general to talk about it? In other words, you could cover it up, but it's in the newspapers. It was never about the UFOs. We've all seen UFOs. What are those things over the Hudson Valley? What are those things over Phoenix? What are those things out in the Pacific? I mean, get together on this. We've all seen them. The CIA can deny it, but what does the CIA then say in its official history of UFOs? That's the big cover-up. Oh, we use UFOs as a cover for stealth. When, of course, we all knew they couldn't be using UFOs as a cover for stealth when there was no stealth, when they were doing the cover-up for the stealth. Document after document after document, read Rich Dolan's wonderful book on the national security state, points to the existence of UFOs. It was never about the UFOs. It's almost like it's not about the UFOs. right? That's exactly what they said. What did they say? It's about time travel, stupid. That's what it was about. The Army, and of course the Air Force by default, had stumbled across an unbelievable capacity of those who had sent the craft here. And to their absolute, and I am telling you what this guy said, his word was shock and dismay. An absolute capacity about us. Because remember, there were other crashes after Roswell. Remember Kingman, Arizona, 53? There were other crashes. What they found was that these entities didn't just mentally project themselves. And if you look at some of the stories, the emitters, element 115, and I can go into that too. Maybe we'll do that at the workshop, how the technology works. But the point is, because no one works those papers, the point is that they were able to project themselves, to use the capacity to view something. In other words, they had made a practical application of something that the quantum physicists predicted existed, but which nobody could do. What was the prediction? Non-locality. That there was a unity of time and space such that you could manipulate that to take yourself to a spot. We'll get into some more practical applications of that in a bit, but that was the secret. Remote viewing, projection. And the secret was not that they could do it, because they could. The secret was that we could do it. And the secret was not only that we could do it, but we had been doing it, and probably had been doing it for a long, long time. Shamanism, medicine, ESP, higher sensory projection. That was what drove the military crazy. Now, let's go back to a second to Richard Dolan's concept of a national security state. And let's take it out of the realm of UFOs, okay? That's Richard's book, but let's say national security state out of UFOs. For a national security state to exist, and Jim Sanders, whom you may or may not know, who was the person who investigated the shoot-down of TWA Flight 800, is writing a book now about militarism, the weapons of mass delusion of the national security state. If you are maintaining a national security state, you are maintaining a state in which it is no longer a republic. That secrets of that state are so important that you will distort even the basic constitutional premises of the state itself to maintain those secrets. What secret could be that important? Well, since everybody had seen a UFO, I got to tell you, it wasn't UFOs. What Hoover told me, what Corso has said, what Colonel Corso has written, was that it was the ability to remote view. In one of the final chapters of The Day After Roswell, we alluded to that when we said that Arthur Trudeau had asked Colonel Corso to write him a report based on this paraphernalia, this headgear that was in the crash debris, on how groups of psychics could focus their energy to distort or manipulate or just change the incoming trajectories of warheads on MIRVs, multiple reentry vehicles. Now, the year is 1962, and we're talking about psychic projection to affect the incoming trajectory of warheads. And that was a report that Colonel Corso wrote for Arthur Trudeau shortly before Arthur Trudeau retired. Now that's an astounding report. The implications of that are phenomenal. It takes the entire story of Roswell, because this piece of headgear, this paraphernalia was in that craft, and puts it into a whole new position. And so when George Hoover told me in 2000 that this is what, or 99, that this is what in fact the issue was, it was this absolute interface. He was the Colonel Corso of the United States Navy. This was a man who invented the concept for the heads-up display in today's jet fighter. So when you're in an F-16 or an F-15, and you're looking at the heads-up display and the radar tracking, invented by George Hoover. Not a flake, not a kook, not a crazy. Hoover invented certain kinds of computer displays for our nation's attack subs to track the Russian boomers, the Russian ICBM subs. Not a flake, not a kook. When he retired from the Navy, George Hoover became the advisor to Walt Disney for the Man in Space, the old Disneyland television show back in the 1950s, that series. He was the advisor. What did he know? I'm in his library in California. He is done. I'm looking at this vast repository of files. Ladies and gentlemen, your eyes will fall out of your heads. The files exist. One of my partners is writing them up. So, in those files, all the stories of how he invented certain objects, the logic, the methodology, all the way back, there it was, Morris K. Jessup, and notes and notes and notes on time travel, on remote viewing, on psychic projection, and a whole, not just a bookshelf, but a wall of books on UFOs. The man was a scholar of UFOs. It was not science fiction. This was real. So real that it was like the early memos Colonel Corso showed me when we now it's 1990s, these people are grown. Can you imagine where that went? Look at the history of the remote viewing program. Read what McMonagle said. Read the book Psychic Warrior. Read what Ed Dames said. This stuff goes private. What did Eisenhower warn us about? A military-industrial complex. Where do you think? I mean, Phil Corso would said it way up front. Where was the first place we took this paraphernalia? To defense contractors. We took it to the boys who were making the stuff. That's where it went. Corporate America. They're the ones that are doing this. So if you say, let's stop for a second. What was one of the greatest lines that Nikola Tesla ever said to George Westinghouse? Can you remember what he said? After he had successfully transmitted an energy bolt in that turn-of-the-century experiment in Colorado, what did Tesla say he discovered? What did he tell Westinghouse? Grinning from ear to ear is only a Serbo-Croatian grin, but from ear to ear to Westinghouse. It's a free energy! What was the wrong word? Well, what do you think remote viewing is? You don't have to go on JetBlue anymore. If I want to be there, I can go there. And I don't have to leave the room. I don't even have to close my eyes. That's what they discovered. And then they discovered something really awful when they were doing the early remote viewing experiments in the middle 60s. They didn't just discover they could go there. They discovered they could go there. In other words, your tasker, who's got a random number, hands you a random number, the random number points to coordinates in his mind, you're the remote viewer, you're the person who's got the task, you focus on the random number, and you're there. But suddenly, you're there. but it's 1860. Okay? Bad. Bad. You can never let this out. Can you imagine a society of human beings? As Phil Corso says a little while ago, they get the keys to the car, but they don't got no license. What do you do? Well, the story gets worse. If we can do it in our present, extrapolate, ladies and gentlemen, who else can do it? Right? And if they can manifest themselves in our present, what then happens? You've got corruption of the timeline. What do you think these entities were when Colonel Corso in the desert in New Mexico saw this craft? He was flying over his little Piper, and he saw this craft on the ground. He landed the Piper, he told his pilot, land, damn Piper, they drove out there in a staff car all alone, touches the stupid thing. It's ice cold. How many of you have been in that New Mexico desert in the middle of July? Ice cold. And you know exactly what, right, and it's shimmering, and it disappears. And years later, the colonel was told by members of his own brain trust, it was not a spacecraft. It was a time machine. It didn't take off. The thing just the hell disappeared. In other words, if we can, they can. And here's the secret. That was the worst of all, and that's what George Hoover told me. There ain't no they. They are us. That's the spooky secret. I'm not saying there were no ETs. I'm saying that the people who came there, whatever came there, was us. He didn't know why. We didn't know why. But he said, a lot of people are spending a lot of money on this. And the secret was so guarded. Imagine a secret that's so guarded. Just imagine this. That Jimmy Carter sees a flying saucer. Nixon could have shown Jackie Gleason dead bodies, but Jimmy Carter sees a flying saucer and announces, you know, I want you to all focus your consciousness on this, as George would say. He stands up and says, I'm going to tell the truth about UFOs to the American people. We all remember Jimmy Carter's famous statement. What did he never do? Never tell the truth about UFOs to the American people. Right? I mean, read my lips, no new UFOs. Didn't happen. Why? As the story goes, this mysterious person walks into Carter's office, right past the Secret Service guard. If you've ever seen that, it's a very small anteroom. I mean, I've seen it. It's a very, it's at the White House. It's small. It's an anteroom. It's almost like a little chamber. I mean, it's like it's the president. It's like, why is it so small? I don't get it. Well, the White House is 20 years old. But the thing is, a small office outside. The Secret Service sits, and the president sometimes. Reagan had this real habit because he was really kept out of the loop and a lot of stuff. He would look out to see who was in the office. Reagan, the president's head. Anyway, who could walk by? Who could walk by Secret Service? Obviously somebody with clearance, correct? And it wouldn't be some guy wearing a black hat, like Tommy Lee Jones or somebody. It wouldn't be that person. It would be somebody so recognized, it would be the Condoleezza Rice of the Carter administration. Think now, who would walk, you got it, who would walk into that office with national security clearances so high that he could say to the president, you will not tell the American people about UFOs. You will not tell them the truth. It'll be the end of your presidency and probably the end of everything you know. Who could walk into the office with such a high security clearance? Anybody get a name? Here you go. Zbigniew Brzezinski, Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, the Condoleezza Rice of the Carter administration. Hoover told me that person never left. Hoover told me Corso never left. Never left. Once you're in, you don't leave. I'll give you a 30-second anecdote, and then I'll tell you why there will be no disclosure that way. Here's the 30-second anecdote. Told to me by somebody, I can't mention, I promised him, he was one of those who vetted Corso. You think that we put our names on a book by somebody that was unvetted? You think I'm actually going to go before the American public on a book about flying saucers unless I had some shred of credibility about this? In the workshop, we'll talk about that credibility. You know, I'm not that stupid. I'm not going to go forward and stand in front of Dateline and 60 Minutes and all those news stories and say, oh yeah, this guy was the flying saucer guy. Wouldn't I have had to have one simple piece? I actually had a whole file of pieces. One of the people who vetted Corso was so in, everybody else is out. Told me this story. A test pilot friend of his at Area 51 was asked to test a flight simulator. True story, a flight simulator. The guy steps into the booth. Seconds later, he's on the other side of the hangar. He doesn't know how he got there. This is 30 years ago. He doesn't know how he got there. And he says, I'm out of here. And they say to him, feet first. You ain't out of here. Now, what does this mean? It means this. That don't you think that a book is sensitive about secrets, about talking about Kennedy, I mean, think of what didn't happen if the day after Roswell came out. What did the book say? Think about the implications of this for 1 second. What did the book say? It said that IBM, Monsanto, Bell Labs, all those patents, all those billions and billions of dollars, where did they come from? Right? They were not invented here. Shockley, Brattain, the transistor, out of that crash. Who never stepped up to say anything? Who? You're challenging patents, ladies and gentlemen. You're challenging patents right the hell smack in the middle of .com America, when patents are the most valuable things. Who didn't say anything? Bell Labs, IBM, Monsanto, not a peep. Shouldn't the Army have said, this guy's a fraud, this guy's a hoax, this guy's crazy, this guy's a coup? Shouldn't the Army have said it? You know what the Army did? You know what they did? I'll tell you another story. You know what they did? They ordered 5 boxes of books in the Pentagon bookstore saying all of Colonel Corso's old friends at the Pentagon want to buy the book. That's what they did. So we printed an article in UFO magazine 3 years ago on Star Wars. The Star Warriors, Myers and Rummy. The weapons in Iraq, the weapons in Afghanistan, the weapons all over the place, the weapons we're using, they came out of the crash in Roswell. Colonel Corso talked about it. Directed particle beam weapons, high energy lasers. It's in the book. It's all in the book. We get a letter. I wish I had the magazine, but we got a letter. A letter from Rummy's office. We're quaking. Man, this guy's pissed. We open the letter. What an excellent article on Star Wars. Can you send us a part in the magazines, please, the Pentagon? We get a letter from Richard Myers. Again, what's he going to say? Thanks for putting me on the cover of your magazine. Could you send me a box magazine, please, with the Pentagon? They want to know. In other words, I believe, and I will go over this in the workshop again and again and again. When you say, oh, Colonel Corso, he broke his oath. Oh, Colonel Corso, nobody broke anything. Don't you realize he indicated to me without telling me it was part of the plan? So when you talk about disclosure, all those people in the black hats, in the funny capes, in the wacky sunglasses, in the pink uniforms, they're all gone. What's left? What's left is basically the Department of Motor Vehicles for UFOs. And you know how screwed up they are. In other words, there is no big cover-up. There doesn't have to be, because there never was a cover-up in the first place. We, looking at the obvious truth, chose to believe something else because the truth was too big. So of course Colonel Corso could write the day after Roswell. Why not? Who's stopping him? Nobody. In fact, they're applauding from the sidelines as he's writing the book. So how and when will disclosure come? And I leave you with this, and I hope we can pick it up again in the workshop. How and when will disclosure come? When we realize collectively it's already taken place. That's when it will come. Act on that information, not on the information that they're keeping it from you, because they can't, because you already know. Maybe 2 minutes for questions. Anybody have any? Right there.
Some of us know more than others. There are certain things that it seems to me are kept from us. What about all the money that's being used for things that could be used for maybe other things?
Why? And this gentleman says, where's the beef? Where's the money? Some people know more than others. Some people have more freedom than others. Some animals have more equality than others, as George Orwell said. How come some people know more and where's the money? That's a great question. The money was never there in the first place. Put your brain around this, that there is a group, and that group will control the money going from government to corporations to government back to the government. Whether it's UFOs, whether it's toilet seats, whether it's platinum bolts, it's irrelevant, okay? You will have free energy when the oil companies figure out a way to monetize it, commoditize it, and bill you for it. That's when you'll get your free energy. Okay? Same thing. Right there, gentlemen.
2 questions. How is it you're able to come to go to the White House? And the second thing, if we have the capability of traveling there and then, without, or mentally, why do we need UFO time machines?
Well, the time machines, the question is, how did I get to the White House in the first place? It was long before this book, and I'll tell you that. Second is, if we're able to do this mentally, why do we need time machines? The answer to your second question first. The time machines are the ability to manifest. The remote viewers can get anywhere, but they can't manifest. In other words, they can't have a corporeal presence where they are.
Thank you.
Okay, the time machines physically manifest you where you are. Hence the screw-up, is what George Hoover said. They screwed it up. What happens once you enter the past? What happens?
Change the future.
You've changed it per se. That's what they did, these morons. They changed it per se. And if they got here, where do you think they got? They got to the crucifixion. They got to Appomattox. They got to the Battle of Gettysburg. In other words, our history is riddled with this. That's first. How did I get to the White House? I'm doing a book with Bob Erline called When You Are the Headline for Dow Jones. We had to interview the Reagan White House about the disaster. I think it was the I think it was Challenger, not Challenger. Yeah, when Challenger exploded, or when the space shuttle exploded 1,000 years ago, back in 1980 something, 86. when it exploded in '85. We're interviewing him. So we're interviewing the press corps, the press staff, of how to handle the press, how they did it. Reagan sticks his head around that, right, comes down the hall. Well, you're here to see him. Why don't you see me? And it was one of the funniest things, because there's a president pissed off that we weren't there to see him, but to see the president.
Expand on the Philadelphia experiment.
The Philadelphia experiment, okay? Indeed, what they were trying to do was get ships like the destroyer escort, the Eldridge, into Japanese home waters, and so the Japanese had certain kinds of mines that were set off by the magnetism of the hulls that were demagnetizing. Okay, that was one of the premises of the experiment. Arleigh Burke said that to Colonel Corso. That's all true. All true was that it did go wrong, that they did have an energy burst, that it did arc, that there were crewmen that were fused to the deck. One of the things that happened was that they were playing with, you know, man should never, they were playing with these really high energy bursts, and the ship winked out. It just for a second, you know, there was no alveolate, it winked out. And nobody, you know, it's not like this was like a cataclysm, or like the skies opened up, Moses came down and said, you've gotten the truth. It simply winked out. They discovered something. That was, and then Carl Allen goes to Ray Bradbury, hoaxes up the story, Ray Bradbury writes the, and that's how the story got out of control. But in reality, it winked out. Nobody knew why it winked out. It wasn't a radar thing, it just, for a split second, wasn't there. Then they sent it down to Norfolk, Virginia, into the fog, hence the disappearance. Go ahead.
What did the remote viewers or your research show that's going on with the abductions of thousands?
What the remote viewers discovered: A, there was a Roswell. B, there were underground bases. C, there was a presence on the move. And D, the abductees, in some cases, went to those underground bases. That's what they found out. They couldn't see much more than you're looking through a heavily glazed bathroom window. But they saw enough to know there were conveyor belts, there were machines. In this one case, it was under some big mountain in New Mexico. Name one. I want to say Mount Baldy, but I'm not sure.
Archuleta Mesa.
I don't know. I mean, it was just, I heard the name Mount Baldy. That's in California.
Are you saying that
the abducting? What did the remote viewers see as doing the abducting?
I'll tell you the exact words he used. Who's doing the abducting? The exact words that the remote viewer used. They looked like humans, but I didn't know what they were. Those are his exact words.
Are you saying it's all scripted? Everything?
What's scripted?
Everything.
I would say it is a game. I would say there is a script. I would say there's a, like any government bureaucracy. This is a bureaucracy. This is not some super thing like on, V or, it's not like that. This is a bureaucracy. These are people who are as dumb as an Xcon, who get in their Hondas, fill up with gas, go home, and worry about their lives because they know too much. But I will tell you this, Group A is pissed off at Group B. The guys in Cubicle C want to get more power over the guys in Cubicle C. It's your taxpayers' dollars at work. It's what's been running this country for hundreds of years. People fighting with power. Hence, some stuff gets out, some stuff doesn't. Why do you think nobody can stand up and say, this is what we did? People got killed. Murder has no statutes of limitation. Do you want Ken Starr up your butt investigating you because you killed some scientist who was going to blow the whistle on UFOs? Because that's what would happen. Okay, I've gotten the high sign. I hope to see you all with all your questions in our